Welcome into the Stack Shack Sports Show. Today, we're going to talk about my thoughts about the Ludwig Tarek Invitational and what I think it means for Valorant going forward. We had some news today regarding the upcoming Valorant Championship Series. For those of you that are maybe new here, maybe expecting more NFL content, as that is what we've been doing mostly recently. Obviously, we could talk all things sports on this channel, and that is going to include esports. I'm very interested to see what y'all think. If you want me to cover this more in the future, leave a like and a comment down below to help this video in the YouTube algorithm. This is our first kind of foray into esports, so let's just jump straight into it. Back July 13th and 14th, a couple weekends ago, we had the Ludwig Tarek Invitational 2, Ludwig Tarek being two of the biggest content creators in our space. They held this kind of a open exhibition tournament last year, and they hosted it again this year. 4 teams. Spoiler alert, this is how it ended up. Oxygen taking home the win, Moist, Shopify, MXS, as they are known, Cloud9 and 100 Thieves. What is curious about this, as I'll scroll down here to the bracket so you can see this as we talk about it, what is very curious and what was surprising, I think, to a lot of fans, is the fact that it is the Tier 2 teams. So in Valorant, if you're unfamiliar, there is a bit of a relegation system. Well, not really relegation, but a promotional system. We haven't implemented relegation yet. Sounds like it's coming once they get to a certain number of teams. But very similar to how European soccer structures, where you have the Premier League and then you have lower leagues, etc., right? And you can get bumped up or pulled down. In Valorant, you cannot yet get pulled down because they haven't filled all the spots in the upper division. But that's what I mean when I say Tier 1 and Tier 2. What was interesting about this tournament, now, yes, it isn't official, tournament play. It's not the regular season. This is a bit of an exhibition. But the Tier 2 teams, Oxygen and Moist, absolutely crushed the Tier 1 teams. Absolutely smashed them. 2-0, 2-0. And this is how it works. There's matches, right? In Valorant, you have a match, and that contains multiple maps. You got to win 2 out of 3. It's best 2 out of 3. Oxygen and Moist 2-0 the 2 Tier 1 teams in the first round. Then they played each other. Obviously, lower bracket, double elimination. We're all pretty familiar with this kind of a structure. And then 2-0'd Cloud9. Tier 1 teams didn't win a single map against Tier 2 teams in this tournament. And to me, that was a bit surprising until I started to think about it. Okay? When thinking about it, let's pull the rosters up here. You have a situation within Tier 2 and Tier 1, and we'll get into the tweet this morning, winning out, talking about the VCT and how they're not expanding the season. We have a situation here where these Tier 2 rosters, Oxygen, MXS, that's quite the tongue twister. These rosters mostly stayed the same from last year. They built consistency within the organization. 100 Thieves and Cloud9 look quite a bit different. 100 Thieves probably even more so than Cloud9. 100 Thieves changed head coaches and changed in-game lead, meaning kind of the captain, the play caller of the team, Boostio, coming in. He's a new player. EU is a new player as well. And it's similar over on Cloud9. They've got new players here. And I think that really showed up in the matches. Moist and Oxygen, those are consistent teams that have mostly stayed together, mostly the same structure. They've been playing together for a long time. Boostio just joined 100 Thieves, a week and a half before this tournament? So what you see here is what happens when your teams do not have an opportunity to practice. together, do not have an opportunity to build a team together. Now, there is some understanding within the community that there is a possibility, a strong possibility, that the Tier 1 teams, Cloud9 and 100 Thieves, were maybe not putting everything on the table. You could think of this as preseason in the NFL, right? You don't show all your plays. Maybe you are trying out some different ideas. In this case, maybe some weird agent picks as to what players are playing on what maps. That is a potential. And maybe in a real tournament setting, 100 Thieves, Cloud9, if they were playing at full strength, really trying, showing full strats, going with their best agent picks, maybe they would have had a better showing. But I do think it is significant that they did not get a single map off of the Tier 2 teams. Great for Oxygen, great for Moist Shopify. That was a big merger to have Shopify and Moist Moguls teams joining forces to come together to build what should be a very strong Tier 2 team this year. But I think it will be interesting as we move towards the VCT, which is the Valorant Championship division. That's your Tier 1. As we get closer to the American kickoff here, coming up in February, we don't know what the group stage, what the playoffs, we don't know what the tournament's going to look like. But as we come in, I think we have to consider teams like G2 especially for this season. Why? Because they are cohesive, especially early on. Look for G2 to be very dangerous early on in the year because I wouldn't say they're the most complete team as far as what team was playing last year to this year. There's other teams that are in similar boats where they haven't had a big turnover. But even some of the teams that we're looking at going, ooh, this is kind of an all-star team, maybe an NRG, which made some huge pickups this offseason. Even a team like NRG, watch out for G2, especially early on. Even if we might say on paper, player-wise, I don't know if they match up well. Because of the cohesive nature of their team, because of the amount of time spent in practice, spent in big tournaments together, working together, communicating together, I think that's going to be really key and something to watch. So if you're looking for, I don't know, maybe some early bets, if you're into betting Valorant, look for a team like G2 to do well early on especially. Okay, going back to the Ludwig Tarek Invitational. If we pull up the maps and we actually look at this, what did happen? Let's pull the Oxygen 100 Thieves match. If we look at it from the overview of how this worked, as time went on, right? First map, 13-7, easy win for Oxygen. Second map goes to overtime. Notice how the Tier 1 teams started to catch up a little bit, right? Started to look a little bit better. And this was Oxygen's map pick, which means they felt they had an advantage on this map. 100 Thieves takes them into overtime. Barely loses. You got to win by 2 in Valorant. And this kind of happened somewhat consistently, I would say. Map to map, match to match, right? Cloud9 fights. Cloud9 gets beat. Now, Cloud9 had a better showing against MXS in the beginning. But, I mean, you look at first half, getting torched. Second half, they came back a little bit, ended up losing. Again, they got 2-0'd, so it's not like this was a good showing for anybody. But, as the day went on, terrible first map. Second map, much, much better. And you look at the second half, right? They're down literally 7-0 to start. Really came back in the second half. These tier 1 teams, Cloud9, 100 Thieves, they need time. They need more practice. They need more opportunities to work together. I think they will be fine, both teams. Not ready to panic on either of them yet, but I do think it is an interesting point to note. You need practice. You need continuity. And that brings us into the next thing. This morning, Jake Lucky retweeting. There is an announcement from the powers that be with how they run the season. They're expanding the calendar next year to space things out and shorten the offseason. Right now, Valorant has a fairly short regular season and playoffs, and then, you're dealing with 6-8 months of no Valorant, and then boom, it's all crammed in there, right? So they are going to space things out, but they said they like the baseline number of matches each team currently plays, and they're not looking into increasing that. Their point being, ultimately, fans want to see the best teams play more. Those teams make it to the global events, which extends the season, right? You have your region. You play in the U.S. You play in the Americas, really North and South America, Central America. You play in Europe. You play in Asia, etc., etc. And then the best teams from each of those go on and play in these big international tournaments. It's very similar if you're familiar with kind of how international soccer structures. It's somewhat similar to that, where then, the champions of different leagues will then play in a bigger league or a big tournament, really. That's the same kind of structure here in Valorant. And they have their tier 2 scene challengers, their non-male team game changers. So they have some other leagues, some other smaller leagues, and they're saying, hey, there's a lot of Valorant to watch. To me, I respect this decision, but I can also see the criticisms with it. On one hand, and this is where I sit from a positional perspective, more matches is not always the best idea. It can be decent for revenue, baseball, right? Look at how much money those teams make in baseball. But from a viewership perspective, from a passion perspective, from a driving of ratings, driving of big sponsors, look at the NFL. The NFL has a shorter season. College football has a shorter season, much shorter than basketball or baseball, which gives us urgency. It makes every game must-watch television. And that is somewhat similar in Valorant. Because there are less games, less matches, we have a situation where it feels like during the regular season, every single weekend is must-watch. You gotta be there. You gotta watch. Because you don't want to miss out on any of it. And a win or a loss is incredibly impactful. Every match matters. And yes, we'll have situations like the NFL does. The Carolina Panthers, they're terrible. Everybody knows they're terrible. They lose a bunch of games to start the year. And yeah, maybe Carolina becomes a little bit unwatchable. You're like, well, they can't make the playoffs. It's not as interesting anymore. And yet, it still works because other teams still have things to play for. And it's going to be inevitable. If you added an extra 10 games, the bad team is just going to lose more games. It doesn't make sense to say, oh, well, we need more games so we can see more matches so that teams have more opportunities to make the playoffs. Well, in reality, that's not really going to be the case. If you're a bad team, unless you make a big pickup or a big change and maybe you come back, but you can still do that, and adding a bunch of extra games just to give teams more time to do something like that doesn't make sense to me. So that's my one hand. I want urgency. I want every match to feel like it matters. So don't add a bunch of matches. But I do understand the critique to say, hey, we would like a few more matches. Right now, it is fairly small number of matches, especially when you compare it to any of the other big esports in the game right now. Compare it to League of Legends. Compare it to CSGO. Valorant plays the least matches, by my understanding and by my calculations. Because of that, I can understand how some people would be frustrated, right? Your favorite team is potentially playing only 10 times a year. That's frustrating. Like I said, right here, here's my tweet. Go follow me on Twitter if you're interested. I think it's reasonable. I think a little bit more ownership is on the organizations to join more exhibition matches, to run more off-season tournaments. Like, if you want to show off your roster more often, get a few more of these off-season tournaments. I think that could absolutely fill in. You know, look at USA Soccer. We play friendlies, right? There's in international soccer, you have friendlies. Play some friendlies. If you're worried, a lot of people are complaining to say, hey, you need to have more matches so the orgs can make more money. That's a fairly reasonable complaint, right? You look at baseball, those baseball teams make a ton of money because they have a ton of games to sell tickets to. If you only have 10 matches, that's tough. That's tough, especially when you're dealing with a situation where it's a franchised org. There are certain limitations. You got to invest a decent amount of money. Obviously, we want to watch more Valorant, right? But I don't think we should go overboard like a lot of Valorant fans are asking for. Calm down, settle your horses. You don't need 50 matches a year. And I know some of the pros are complaining because they want to get paid, right? And more matches, bigger contracts. Look at how much money people make in baseball. Look at Shohei Ohtani's contract. That is built by the fact that there are that many games. But when you do that, when you put out that much product, when you put out that many matches, you can easily fall into baseball situation where it's largely irrelevant. They're watching stadium attendance decline. They're watching TV ratings decline. It's slow. There are obviously still going to be people to watch, and that's what's still driving that sport and what would drive Valorant. There would still be some diehard fans. But for others, to build it into a strong esports scene, I think limiting the number of matches is still a good idea. Now, is 10 the right number? I don't think 10 is probably the right number. I think you could increase that. Maybe increase that to 15 or 20. Look at the NFL, right? They got 18 weeks. College has, 12, 15, depends on how you deal with conference championships and all of that too. But make the regular season guaranteed, and that's what they're saying here. It's hard to support your favorite team if they only play 10 times a year. Well, I don't know if I agree with that precedent because I still support my NFL team and they only play 18 times a year. But 18 is a lot more than 10. And I can understand some frustration to say, hey, if the minimum amount of games that a franchise team is going to play is 10, without them playing in outside exhibition tournaments or without them making it to the postseason, there's a fair criticism there to say, hey, let's jump it to 15. Maybe jump it to 20. Sit there at 20. Because the other thing about Valorant is some of these matches, especially in big tournament days, they play multiple times in one single day. So it's not like I'm getting 10 weeks minimum, necessarily, of my team playing Valorant. They could be playing a game on Friday and a game on Sunday. And a game on Saturday. Or maybe they play 2 on Saturday. So even though they might be playing 10 times, that might only cover, actually in weeks, 5 weeks. Obviously, it's spread out over a longer period of time. But as far as, oh, my team is playing this week in Valorant, you might be dealing with only 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. And 6 weeks is not enough. That I can 100% get behind. So in my opinion, how do we fix this? You either need to add a couple more games, bump it to 15, bump it to 18, maybe bump it to 20. Or, I would argue, think about how you're structuring these big tournaments so that teams are not playing twice in one weekend or back-to-back matches in one day. By doing that, you can make it feel like there are more matches, right? If I watch 2 or 2 matches in a day, and my team only plays in 6 weeks out of the year, that's disappointing. But they could play those same 10 matches over 10 weeks, and I feel like that would be a better experience as a fan. I would feel like they played for a longer period of time. That's my take. Let me know down below in the comments what you think. How do we fix the Valorant season? What did you think of the Ludwig Tarek Invitational and the fact that the Tier 1 teams got cooked? Does that mean that the Tier 1 teams are worse, or do they just need some more practice? Were they hiding strats? What's your opinion? Let me know down below. Share this with a friend if you want to see more esports content. I'm testing it out this week. I'll probably test it out next week as well. If y'all don't want it, I won't keep making these, but I'm really passionate about it. I think it's pretty interesting, and hopefully you do as well. If you enjoyed it, share it with a friend so that we can keep making content like this. We'll be back tomorrow with my best bets of the week in the NFL. So do make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on that, and we'll see you then.